Alright, so our LEQ is asking how an author uses narrative elements to build a story. By narrative elements, I refer to the building blocks that are going to have to exist in every single story because without them, we don't have a story. Those narrative elements are the setting, the conflict, the plot, and the characters. The setting, as I'm sure you know, is where and when a story takes place. So you're not just going to say that the setting is an old creepy castle, but instead an old creepy castle in the early 1500s, for instance. So it's very important to also include when the story is taking place when talking about setting. The next narrative element is conflict, and by conflict I mean a struggle or a problem in the story. And that conflict is going to be very important in the plot of the story. There are two types of conflict that conflict can fit into. One is an external conflict, meaning that the conflict is occurring outside of the character, and the other is an internal conflict, meaning that it's happening inside of the character. But then they get more specific. There are subtypes to the conflict. So there's character versus character conflict, which is external because it's a character fighting with someone outside of them. Character versus self, which is our one and only internal type of conflict. This is usually some kind of indecision that the character has. They can't decide with themselves about something. The next is character versus society. Again, that's external. Character versus nature, which is external. And character versus destiny or fate. You can call it either or, and that's external. So we have our two types of conflict, external and internal, and then it breaks down there into more specifics. But the only type of internal conflict that exists is this one here, character versus self. So one very helpful way of thinking about conflict is that your character, your main character, wants something, but something else is standing in their way. So if we think about that in terms of character versus character, we might have Amber wanted to answer the question, but Alex beat her to it. So it's one character in conflict with another character. With character versus self, we might have Axel wanted to become a doctor or a lawyer, but he couldn't decide which one he wanted to be more. So Axel's in debate with himself. With character versus society, you could have Miss Galgano's students wanted to go to school year-round, but Howard has summer vacation. So in that case, it's you as my students versus the entire society of Howard High School. Character versus nature might look like Amani wanted to wear a skirt, but it was too cold in Miss Galgano's class, so she wore jeans instead, in which case it's the natural elements of my classroom, the temperature, that gets in the way of Amani's desires. And character versus fate might look like Miss Galgano wanted her period 1-2 to stay longer, but the bell rang and class was dismissed. The bell ringing is an element of fate. I have no control over it. Time goes on without our control, and so that got in the way of my desires. So plot, or also called narrative structure, is the structure of the actions and events in a work, particularly in a work of fiction. The plot follows the progression of a conflict. So in each section of the plot, something different is occurring in terms of the conflict of the story. And without that conflict, there is no plot. There is no story to be told unless there is a conflict. So the 5 main components of plot are the exposition, rising action, climax, and falling action, and then the resolution. And these are the 5 parts that you have to pull from when you summarize a story. I want you to stop this video now and return to Schoology, and in that next video we'll go into more detail about what happens in each of those 5 components of the plot.